Gentlemen.
Here.
Oski Benali Jr. Sasha Bittner,
Yeah.
Theo Brady, Kim Ridley, Lisa Rifkin,
Here.
Neil Romano. Staff, Joan DeRocher.
Here.
Kimmy Ikabachi, Netery Lewis, Ann Summers McIntosh,
Here.
Amy Nicholas,
Amy's here.
yes, Nick Sabula, here, Emgad Solomon, Anna Torres Davis,
Here.
Keith Wood.
Here.
Go back to you, Chair Kinnemer.
Thank you, Stacy. So to begin day 2 of the meeting, I will call on myself for the chairman's report. I want to start the chairman's report with acknowledging the staff at the National Council. Without them, we can't do our truly good work that we do here in advising the federal government on issues related to people with disabilities. We have an impressive team of professionals that work for the council. They're quite the steam engine that drives everything that we do. Although they're small, many of our staffs have hit major milestones in federal public services. So today I want to recognize their accomplishments and read their names out loud, along with their years of service. So we'll start with Keith Woods and Jed. I know. How do you say your name, Jed? Jed Solomon, who have achieved 10 years of federal service in 2026. They will have achieved 10 years of service. Amy Nichols will have 11 years of service. Ann Summers McIntosh will reach 17 years of federal service in November. Anna Torres Davis will have 18 years of federal service in this September. Netery Lewis will have 22 years of federal service. And Joan DeRocher will have 30 years of federal service. So I want to thank you all for your public service, particularly for your support of NCD on behalf of the people with disabilities in the United States. So it's also come to my attention that there's one more member of NCD whose tenure has far surpassed any others. And that's Stacy Brown. Stacy, will you join me up front here? So I just want to say, yay, Stacy. So let me get through this real quick, Stacy. Hold on just a second. Stacy Brown is NCD's staff assistant and started when he was just 19. No, get over here. Tell me if I'm wrong. His federal service started when he was 19 with the U.S. Access Board, who is actually the sister agency of the National Council on Disabilities, and we're actually in their conference room right now. Stacy first worked for the U.S. Access Board, then came to work for NCD. Then he left us for a brief period and went to work for the Board of International Broadcasting. Then he came back to us again before the ADA was signed into law. So this July, Stacy reached his 40 years of service in the federal government. I am calling out your age. Huh? And we are so happy to be the beneficiary of this commitment to the American public. And for that, we thank you so much, Stacy, for your 40 years of service. And we have, apparently I did not know this until they said we get service pins. But Stacy, this is your certificate for you to hang in the front office here and with all of your service. My honor. Thank you.
Yay. Yay, congrats. Congratulations.
So I will, that's the great thing I get to do as the chairman. If you guys never wanted to be in this position, but it's such a great honor to do this and be able to do this for the staff. Stacy will be the first one if you ever come to the National Council office that you will see, and he's always has a smile that I've known. So others may say differently, I don't, but I've always seen him with a smile. So with that, we're going to move on to so council members reports. So it's still part of the chairman. So I'll just talk about a little bit about what I've done in the last, what has it been, 3 months? Time's going so fast. Anyway, so I have actually attended several discussions in the state of California and Sacramento and San Francisco over the last few months about the ongoing DSP crisis that we're facing, and the lack of funding from the state of California, as well as I have been in New Orleans for the ARC National Conference, addressing the needs and concerns at the national level. And then in August, I'm sorry, for the ADA celebration, I could say in July, I actually had the opportunity to speak at the Health and Human Services 35th anniversary celebration, and it was a great honor to be there. And while there, we actually reached out in the 2 minutes that you have to introduce yourself to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I actually brought up the fact that the National Council needs to be present and have a seat at the Make America Healthy Again table. And he seemed very, and I had mentioned that we had written a letter to him a few months prior, and he actually wanted us to reach back out, which we have done as well. So, always trying to bring us to the forefront and taking every opportunity. I think I surprised him because I think he just wanted big readings, and I'm like, we need to be there. So, so that's my report, and we'll go in order. I'll start this way. Miss Risa, will you share your report?
Thank you. You always make me so happy to go. But we're going clockwise. That's all.
There's no slide.
It got better. Volume better. Are you picking me up? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So over the last several months, I've been hearing a lot of, I sound like a broken record, but continued concern from the community, especially in the months that have happened since we last met, around decisions around Medicaid and budgets, and just raising that again as something that I hope the council will continue to watch and be, in discussion about with the community. That really has been what I've heard a lot. It was a pretty interesting 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, I feel like, in the community, and just recognition of it's in a moment of celebration, but also a moment of concern, and really thinking what the future looks like, and hoping that disability inclusion continues to be at the forefront and not just not thought of, but not undone. So I will leave it at that. Keep my remarks short. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Risa. Hey, Neil. I didn't skip you. I didn't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As most of us know, next month, October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, ND. And I've had the pleasure, along with the Professional Baseball Athletic Trainers Society, to be working with ODEP as they plan for their celebration, as they plan for that month. And that's it's a pretty well, certainly Major League Baseball is very honored to be allowed to be part of that. That goes back to historically years of working with the Professional Baseball Athletic Training Society and ODAP, who have had an agreement now for 12 years. I think it's their longest single group. And that has, over the years, we've done a series of television commercials that included pieces with Jim Abbott, who was a one-handed pitcher, and so on. And the whole concept of the relationship between these two developed the concept that people with disabilities are valuable and useful and can compete in any field that they choose, given the opportunity. And certainly when you have something like an exclusive sport, as difficult to do as Major League Baseball, and you realize dozens and dozens of people with disabilities who played the game. We go through some of them. We've had people illegally blind that play. We've had people who were, who had gone on, have really shown up. I mean, didn't just take a day on the field, but became great ball players. So we're very pleased to be working on that. We expect there's going to be a series of events that are also going to include baseball. That's one of the things that I've been working on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Theo.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I would love to be able to report on something positive, but a lot of stuff is coming at us. As executive director of the National Council on Independent Living, I hear a lot of stuff from our membership. Right now, the biggest thing that I'm hearing is dealing with the executive order on homelessness and mental illness. So we're very concerned that that is going to impact people with disabilities, right? A lot of homeless people in regard to being identified, not only homelessness, but they have disabilities. And we're concerned that this is one step moving towards reinstitutionalization. And so I'm hoping that people will pay attention to that. I'm hoping that not only NIFL, but National Council on Disabilities recognize that a proportionate of individuals who are affected by that executive order will be people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, autism, mental illness. We have worked very hard to be having a community living bias versus the institutional bias, and we don't want to see reform go back to that. So just want to keep that, make you all aware of that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Kimberly.
Thank you. Theo, I want to echo first what you said in New York. We are hearing a lot of fear about that executive order, what it's going to mean. My staff in New York have a particular concern. Really begin to roll back homestead provisions. So a lot of fear there, a lot of fear with the budget cuts coming down. Since I'm fortunate enough to work in the executive chamber, we're in the beginning prep stages of state of the state. So we have incoming on every possible issue in New York right now as we're developing the proposals for our governor. And then we continue to hear housing, employment. Sean, I want to build on like the DSP crisis in California. Absolutely similarly in New York, but I want to expand it to both PCAs, home health aides, PAs. The workforce crisis is a significant barrier and one that we continue to hear about. And Neil, looking forward to NDEAM. New York has taken NDEAM and we've turned it into our DREAM Symposium, Dream for Disability Rights Employment Awareness Month, so that during the Employment Awareness Month festivities, we also talk about the rights of people with disabilities and how when we have significant issues with our rights being met, that really prohibits us from being able to care. So as we move forward with this symposium every year, we start talking about all the obstacles to employment as well as things for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Sasha. Report.
Yeah, so I want to apologize to people have talked about. I was actually honored in San Francisco for the 88th celebration. I was honored by the Board of Supervisors. And that was really nice, but everyone in the community is so worried about the Medicaid cuts and how that will affect California. I mean, I mean, I think the California is going to do everything they can to protect disabled people, but it's still going to be incredibly uh, and the, and so I might just believing a lot about that. And then also with the Isaac since the some people aren't getting out of bed because there is personal assistance. I'm worried about getting picked up. But I know that is a problem too. Um, but I believe it was a positive thing that San Francisco now is a disability cultural center. And I got to go to its grand opening and it was really nice and they have a lot going on. So, even though even in summer dog time still is some light. So, yeah. And I'm done.
Okay. Sasha, we appreciate your report. Is Hosky on the phone?
We are in the
Don't-
process of trying to get Hosky in a situation where he'll be unmuted.
Okay.
I'm
When
here.
that hap-
I'm here.
Oh, yes. All right. Yay. Okay, Hosky, your report, please.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, we got two things going on here in Indian country in regards to disabilities. The first one is the Navajo Nation is going to have its 50th anniversary celebration and providing VR services. We started back in 1975. And so this is our 50th anniversary, and we're going to have a celebration on October the 29th in Flagstaff. And we're bringing in people that were very much involved in how far we've come today in providing VR services. I was one of the first VR counselors back in 1977. So that's what we're going to be doing. The other thing is we are planning a disability symposium here, and the dates for that will be, and this is going to be virtual, and it's going to be on November 7th and the 14th. And what we're doing is, some of you probably can recall that we had a survey that we did in providing, asking individual disabilities or Native American um, about their status and some of the challenges they were having. And this came out of the Intertribal Disability Advocacy Council report that was presented to NCD probably about a year ago or so. So now we're taking off from that, and we're going to have this symposium, and it's going to be organizations that serve people with disabilities that are indigenous. And what we're going to do is we have 3 areas that we're looking at. That's going to be education, welfare, and health. And so we're putting together this symposium and inviting American Indian disability organizations to do presentations, talk about what their services are, and then also tell us about what the barriers and service gaps that they're experiencing and their recommendations for funding and policy changes. So we're putting all that together now. And out of that, we'll also have a report coming from those that are organizations that will participate. So the other thing is question from indigenous country is that why is not NCD coming out and do their quarterly meetings here in the West, like Salt Lake, Denver, Phoenix area? We're just wondering why there's always back east. So that's the other thing. So that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Hosky. Yes, we will address that this next year. We believe that we need to get out to the West Coast as well. So, so we're just waiting on some other information to come through before we decide where exactly we're going to go. But I really appreciate your report, Hosky. And okay, so with that, we are going to move to our executive committee reports, and we're going to start with our governance reports. And that's Sasha and Joan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sasha has asked me to give the report for the governance committee. She is the chair of the governance committee. Let's see here. So the current bylaws of NCD require NCD to provide for a public comment period at its meeting. Over time, NCD has had challenges implementing this provision due to technical difficulties, virtual platforms, for example, the inability to control whether commenters who register will actually provide comment at the meeting, and the challenge of controlling comments by malicious actors who might call in. Overall, it has not been a smooth or informative activity, and it is the weakest part of NCD's information gathering for its report. So staff took on the challenge of looking at this and coming up with ideas to improve the public comment process. And the chair and Sasha and the staff support the plan that they proposed. First, the bylaws would have to be amended to allow for public comments during meetings, but not requiring a public comment period. In other words, the change will not prohibit us from having public comments, but it will not require us to do so. To make this improvement, a couple of sentences in our bylaws would have to be changed. First, we need to delete public comment from page 30. And this is all in your notebook materials. Second, on page 31, we would change the sentence to chairperson or designee will conduct a public comment session at each scheduled meeting of the council. We would change it to the chairperson may provide the opportunity for public comment related to policy topics on the council's agenda scheduled meeting council. And last, we would remove the sentence, the chairperson may limit the time for comment based upon number of requests or the length of the planned agenda. Along with this bylaw change, To improve our ability to obtain public comment, NCD staff will implement a three-pronged strategy. Okay, so the first prong is after the council votes to approve policy priorities like we did at the last meeting, if appropriate for the project, staff will prepare a formal request for information, an RFI, for publication in the Federal Register. This will have broad reach and raise public awareness of our priorities and the gravity of the issue we're examining. The information gathered will help make our staff some of the most informed federal advisors on these topics and provide increased sources to support our reports and final recommendations. Post announcements on social media about NCD's RFI. The second prong will be staff identifying opportunities to conduct town hall sessions at disability-related conferences and will facilitate town halls to gather information on our policy priorities throughout the years to the greatest extent. The third prong will be that NCD will maintain public comment webpage to accept submissions 24/7. This page contains a description of each project and questions to the public. Next, we'll post announcements on social media about NCD's current opportunities for public comment and a set schedule to keep people informed and bring traffic to our website. With the information that we gather through these avenues at each council meeting, if appropriate, an NCD staff member will provide the council with the amount of comments we receive with general observations about what the staff and the chair believe that this approach to gathering public comment in a threefold manner will substantially improve the public comment part of our work. That is the change that we're all kind of hoping to make, but the council, when you make a change to the bylaws of the council needs to vote on those changes in whole and at an open council meeting. So I will turn it back to the chairman now to see if you'd like to call for a vote and talk about it any further.
Right. So we did have sent this out for comment to the council through email. Is there any comments or discussion from the council members on this area that you would like to have now?
I just have a question. I think that too close, too far, who
Yeah.
knows? I have a question about whether or not the bylaw change happened. The strategy, what you call prong 1, 2, and 3, a really good idea. Would they happen regardless of the change to the bylaw?
That is a good question. And yeah, we've actually started to get all of this underway regardless, but I think we're going to do this anyway. But the bylaw change, the essential piece that's changing and why we need to make that change within the bylaws is that we might not necessarily going forward have public comment at these council meetings. And that's the change that needs to be approved by the full council. You can if you want to, but you can also cut it out. But up till this point, it's been a required part of every council.
So remind me if I'm wrong. I believe the reason that we're changing this also is because of the technology and the resources needed when we travel for council meetings and trying to get that connectivity. It's ultimately very expensive to do that, and we're limited here. And we've been tasked by the White House to cut costs anywhere we can. When we're talking limited, it's like thousands and thousands of dollars. So the goal is not to prevent public comment, but in order to facilitate this, we have to change the bylaw. I would suggest that no chair is going to cut public comment. That's not what we're after. So is that correct?
The idea behind this too was that we often have, we have had so much difficulty with controlling how we can accept public comment. We've actually had a lot of malicious actors that we've had to guard against. People have made very negative comments. And we've had to have someone man the computer, of course, to stop that from reaching everybody. There are challenges just in getting people in the room sometimes. And so, um, like we're saying, it's not that we can't have it, but it does give us an opportunity that if we're in a situation where we're in a place where people can't get to us, if we're having other issues technologically, we can use all of these other options to continue getting really robust public comment. And I think the RFI idea is a fantastic idea. It's not an idea that we have worked with before. It is a formal request for information that goes in the Federal Register. It will go to everybody. And we will be able to get information from researchers and academics and the community, and we'll publish it, and we'll really, really work on using that as a way to inform our reports. Because a lot of what our public comment does is inform our reports. We had a lot of really good success with the ground transportation report. A lot of people showed up for public comment, but we don't often get that at meetings. We're just trying to grow that option a little bit.
I just wanted to ask about, it says in there that Joan, that the chairman will get to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to do this. Is this something that he obviously needs to do in advance if it's going to be electronic? But if it's not electronic and we have an audience, let's say a significant audience from a particular city, can he on the fly then say, I'd like to open it up for comments of the audience? Or does it have to be prescribed or in advance?
Yes, absolutely. The bylaws won't change the ability of the chairman to have public comments at all.
Any other discussion?
This is sorry. This is Lisa. I think what makes me a little nervous is that it seems like we're removing the requirement of public comment and leaving it so open-ended. Is there a way to require public comment in some form? Well, I understand the concerns about meetings and but like your other strategies of opening it up for more forms of public comment, but that's not a requirement with the bylaw change. And I think that gets into tricky territory because I think what is so needed for the council to have a direct connection to community and making that optional, I think undoes a lot of what we stand
Again, it's up to you, obviously, and I think that we're trying to kind of give us more flexibility, but also to give us a greater breadth of ability to get comments from more people. But I do understand your concerns, and I hear you.
And I'm not talking about anyone specifically, Chair. It's not, but like thinking bylaw changes are long-standing, right? So, sorry.
Sasha, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I wonder if we could put something in about public comment so be solicited and other ways of something like that. Well, we make it very clear that we will still be soliciting the public's advice, but that maybe not in that way because I do get what Lisa is saying about we don't want to make it seem like we don't want the public involvement of something about, you know, making it very clear that it would be solicited in another avenues. Did you get what I said?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think as the chair, I'm going to table this for the next meeting, and we'll open back up more discussion, emails to the council, because there seems to be some verbiage that council members want to see, and I think it'd be better that we take this off. Neil?
And I can help you with like wording.
Okay, thank you. Neil?
And Joan, if you don't mind, in the interim, can you let us know if it's statutorily required for us to have public comment? And if we have some kind of a history, I've been here pretty long. I should be getting one of those 40-year pins. But I remember there was a point we didn't have public comment. Then I remember we did. Then I remember it was truncated. But then I remember it was long. And let me just say, in agreement with this change, I mean, sometimes a public comment is excruciating. Say that in the nicest manner. We've had problems, I think that letting people know, I love going through the congressional record and letting people, you can only ask so much. But that, I think, would also put us more in alignment with other agencies, because other agencies don't have public comment where people comment. They put out and ask for comment. So
Right.
that would be, I think that would be, but I just need to know statutorily, does it say that NCD has to do, we have a hard and fast, that would help us. If it's a no, then I think the changes, obviously, to the bylaw would probably be very,
The bylaws, current bylaws require it, there are statutes.
it's not statutory.
I think what everybody's agreeing is we agree with public comment. Maybe the statutory, maybe the change, and we'll go back and revisit that, should be at the discretion of the chair as to what form that takes, whether it's live, whether it's in public, but it has to occur in some way. And
In doing it that way, it also gives the chair the opportunity to be pointed.
Right.
In what
Right.
we want, I mean, I have seen public comment here
Yeah.
sometimes, guys, that, that is, kind of a heaven to hell, people come in and talk about their children, which God bless them, they're certainly entitled to vent. But the fact of the matter is, we're like focusing on something like transportation, focusing, that's the value to the council. Although the venting sometimes is also emotionally good for us to hear. And remember, there are real human beings out there. But, I just think it helps focus us. The end of the meetings, that hour, I think that I have looked at some of my colleagues' eyes and replacing over
Yes.
Thank you.
So yes, no, I thank you for the council. I really appreciate the conversation, and I think we'll table this and then revisit it maybe at our next meeting. But get some more comment, and let's try to work that language a little bit different. Okay, thank you. Our next panel, not panel, our next committee report is a financial report, which is Keith. We're going to ask you to give the financial report of the council, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. The National Council of Disability is currently undergoing our fiscal year 2024 and 2025 biannual audit. In this audit, the auditors evaluate the strength of our internal controls, review our reconciliation process, review samples from payroll, payable, journal entries, personnel actions, and timesheet submissions. Our audit started in July and is scheduled to be finished in mid-November. everything proceeding smoothly, and we're on track to complete the audit on time. So far, we have no funds. The status of funds is reported through July 31st, 2025. Our total budget is $3,850,000, and to date, we have spent 70% of that. We have already set money aside for building renovation, GPO account, furniture replenishing, the nursing home project, and an ATO assessment. As of today, we still have an additional $120,000 to spend.
Council members, any questions?
Real quick, yeah. You have any thoughts on how the 120,000 by the end of the year will be spent?
I'll briefly answer, and then I'll turn it to Anna. Is we have been talking about, we have this, there are some technology equipment for meetings that we could do in-house and not have to outsource stuff that we're talking about. There is some technology issues inside the office that they're needing some more computers because their technology is getting pretty old. So I think we're looking for ideas too, Anna.
As Keith was describing, we've identified several areas where we could use some of these funds. One of the issues that we have faced this year is that when we left during COVID, we gave away a lot of our footprint, our real estate footprint. And so an office that used to house all of our staff now cannot house our staff. And so we have looked at working with GSA to create some workspaces in there so that we can fit and come into the office. And so that is one of the areas where we're looking to spend some of this money. And then to improve some of the old kind of broken or beat up furniture that we have, some of the equipment. And what else was it, Keith? It was the
GPO replenishment.
Right, the GPO.
And then ATO assessment.
Okay, and maybe you can tell them what that is.
So we're required to have a ATO that's authority to operate on other government sites. That's where we can go to like FAA and get our financial report. We're going through the ATO right now, but assessor has to come in and assess their work to make sure we're able to.
So we're talking about getting some certifications, and is that
for our ATO, so we can go other government.
okay? So we can utilize, which would allow us to do more reports and pull more data, correct? Talk to us on the council as though we don't know how this operates, the federal government operates.
Well, you know, every year the federal government agencies face this issue. You know, you have some money, you try to spend it responsibly, you try to identify things that you need. And that's what we're going through now. But we have been going through this for several months. We've been discussing this for several months, trying to figure out what is the best way, what is the most responsible way, what is the most cost-efficient way. And I think we're doing a really good job on that. Right now, we're just trying to, you know, solidify all of that and then make sure that we can designate those funds as needed.
Right, and one of the concerns, I mean, so a little history, under the previous administration, there was no return to work site, and we were actually tasked with downsizing the office space. And so if you've ever been in the office, if you haven't been in the back corner, like half, I would say almost half or more than half of the office space was given up. There's still no wall there. Nobody's occupying it, but in talking, bringing everybody back into the office will require us to expand, but we're still facing executive orders of, well, you can't increase your building. Now, I believe the executive order says unless it's determined necessary to bring people back. So there is one office that we're probably going to reabsorb and grow. Probably, I think it's only about 300, 400 square feet, maybe additional, if that. and then building out workspaces, especially in some areas so that everybody can get back to the office. So that's, but we're also tasked with being very fiscally responsible with the money. And so we're not just going to blow money if we have it to spend it. That's not the limit. But in just the short time I've been in the acting chair position, looking at, I'm like, how are you guys operating with some of your equipment that's old, ages and ages old? So I think we have to get up to the times as well. Thank you. Is there any other comment? Okay, hearing none, do I have yes, thank you. My brain just went blank. I'm on California time. Sasha and Rita, we're all dying right here from the Pacific time. So yes, do I have a motion to approve the financial?
I move.
Okay, Sasha moves and Theo seconds. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Do we need to do a roll call on that? I don't think so. The roll call would be on the other one. Okay, great. Awesome. All right, so that carries. Thank you, Keith, for your report. And then we are now to our panel. So Amy, would you come up and introduce the panel? And Amy will be our facilitator for this panel.
You ready? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman, for this opportunity. Before I get started, I would be remiss in stating or acknowledging that today is the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And all of us know the devastation that was rained on New Orleans and the devastation the disability community incurred during that horrible storm. It's frustrating and agonizing that we're here 20 years later talking about many of the same issues that we have been advocating for the last 20 years. But I'm very pleased and excited to have our panel here, taking a different approach than what NCD normally does. We normally look at the emergency management on a federal level. Back in May, our council voted on our 2026 project to be a toolkit specifically addressing states' issues and what states need, as well as local municipalities, in order to create and implement a functional emergency management plan that's inclusive of people with disabilities. So my panelists today are phenomenal. I'm having mic issues too, Anna. My panelists today are phenomenal people who are going to help guide us as to what needs to be included in that toolkit. It's we've seen an increase in disasters over the last several years. We've seen an increase in extreme weather events over the last several years. We've also seen disasters occurring in locations that normally were assumed to be safe areas that you wouldn't see disasters. Case in point, last year's Hurricane Helene and Milton in Asheville, North Carolina. So, I mean, unfortunately, predictions are that extreme weather events are going to increase in number. And as we know, they can occur anywhere. Every state, every county, every territory, and tribal nation needs to have an emergency management program and a policy that is inclusive of people with disabilities. So when another disaster hits in an area like Asheville, the local emergency operators have the required tools to efficiently care for all community members, including people with disabilities. Over the last 2 decades, we've written multiple reports on emergency management, providing recommendations to federal and state entities. The majority of those recommendations were focused on the coordination and collaboration at a federal level. As I mentioned earlier, this panel and the toolkit is taking a different approach, so I'm excited about that. So today's discussion, we are going to talk about and touch on promising practices and programs, training and procedures that have improved the outcome of people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. All of the panelists have different programs and strategies that they have honed, and I look forward to their discussion. Our first panelist, Natasha Fox, is the Chief Resilience Officer for the Oregon Department of Emergency Management. Natasha leads the integration of OEMs, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility planning. She has goals and objectives across agency operations and strategic initiatives. She collaborates with communities and advisory councils which clear the path for public input and feedback. She also works directly with communities to develop culturally responsive and locally relevant resilience strategies. Natasha, I'm very grateful you're here today. It was a long journey for you. I appreciate you. She's also a West Coaster, so she's working this morning. It's, Natasha, I hand it over to you.
There it is. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, council members.
I'm going to stop you real quick. I'm just going to remind everybody when you're doing about 6 inches from your mouth and project. That's why I've been asked for the ASL interpreter. So.
Copy that. Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, council members, for the great honor of being able to speak with you this morning. In Oregon, where I am Chief Resilience Officer at Oregon Department of Emergency Management, we are working to ensure that accessibility is fully integrated into strategic planning and operational objectives for how we plan, train, exercise, and respond to and recover from disaster. That begins with introducing disability and accessibility competency into the culture of our agency itself. To do that, we hold semi-monthly trainings for all of our 130-person staff on topics such as understanding foundational laws that guide accessible emergency management, using CMIST and applying its principles throughout the disaster cycle, how to hold accessible virtual meetings and social media engagements, creating accessible documents and outreach materials in multiple languages and formats, and that are compatible with assistive devices. We continuously develop and refine accessible outreach and engagement practices in our public-facing events and in public information. And we collaborate closely with our training and exercise section to set objectives that directly improve outcomes for people with disabilities and access and functional needs. We also focus on integration and coordination with the disability community itself. We continue to develop formal pathways for input from nonprofits, centers for independent living, state and local councils, such as the Oregon Disabilities Commission, and community partners across our state so that people with lived experience can shape how we design programs, plans, and policies. This is most critical when it comes to developing and sustaining equitable evacuation and sheltering practices. When the State Emergency Coordination Center activates in an emergency, an equity officer embedded in the Emergency Coordination Center command structure, whose position encompasses disability and access and functional needs support, serves as the lead advisor and subject matter expert to identify gaps, guide decision-making, and ensure accessibility and equity are integrated into every aspect of the operation, including in the development of operational objectives in the incident action plan. The equity officer coordinates with transportation, mass care, health, logistics, communications, power utilities, search and rescue, and recovery. The position also liaises with partners such as the Red Cross and localized disability-led nonprofits such as Upstream Access. This collaboration helps to ensure that people with disabilities and access and functional needs can evacuate safely and be treated with dignity in shelters. Equity considerations also shape evacuation guidance. For example, encouraging households with access and functional needs and people with disabilities to evacuate at a level 2 be set notice rather than waiting for a level 3 go now, so that they have time and resources needed to reach safety. This practice actually comes from one of our 9 federally recognized tribes, the Burns Paiute tribe, which has some fantastic practices to ensure health and safety of elders and people with disability in the tribe. So there is also a great deal to learn from Indigenous practices when it comes to disaster equity. Finally, the equity officer contributes to the design of after-action review guidance, ensuring that the lessons learned include equity and accessibility considerations to strengthen future responses. Of course, evacuation starts with timely and equitable communication, all of which must be arranged well in advance of a hazard. And that is why we have prioritized accessible alerts and warnings. In Oregon, we use the Everbridge platform statewide to deliver emergency alerts across multiple channels: text, voice, email, push notifications, and social media, so that people can receive information in the format that best works for them. It integrates with FEMA's iPause system, supports text-to-speech and multilingual templates, and allows jurisdictions to pre-script plain language alerts that are easier for screen readers. While these features do exist in the platform, the real impact comes from how they're used, which is why we prioritize targeted training and ongoing education with local emergency managers throughout the year to ensure that alerts are developed and delivered in ways that are inclusive and accessible to the whole community. Through my work on the statewide Committee on Alerting Practices, I collaborate with disability advocates and nonprofits to co-develop alert templates in multiple languages and accessible formats so that the local emergency managers can quickly push out notifications to reach the whole community in appropriate ways. And central to all of this work is the role of our Disability in Emergency Management Advisory Council, which we abbreviate as DMAC. DMAC is supported by 3 state agencies: the Department of Human Services, Oregon Health Authority, and Oregon Emergency Management. Because DHS and OHA are the lead emergency support functions for mass care and medical services, the functions that directly interface with people with disabilities during emergencies. Its membership includes people with disabilities, their caregivers, local emergency managers, and representatives from Oregon's Centers for Independent Living, so that this critical expertise is always at the table. DMAC reviews emergency operations plans, both at the county and state levels, through an accessibility lens, and participates in exercises and trainings, contributing lived experience that helps us bridge knowledge with practice. We are also developing new pathways for community input into our after-action reports. Instead of limiting those reports to state agency perspectives, we seek participation from community-based organizations and members of the public to share their lived experiences of our state response. And we don't just produce a static document, we also develop alternative formats such as digital story maps that capture these experiences in more accessible and meaningful ways, ensuring that lessons learned truly reflect the experiences of the whole community so that we can improve for the next crisis. New programs such as this do take time to fully come to fruition. I have only been with my agency for about a year and a half, not even 2 years. So I'm very grateful to my colleagues, some of my personal heroes on this panel, for sharing their knowledge and experience, and to you, council members, for your input, so that we know that we're on the right path in Oregon and we are not building from scratch, though much work still remains to be done. Thank you.
Well, Natasha, thank you very much. Quick question for you to follow up, because you said you've only been there for about a year and a half, 2 years. There are some amazing policies, programs that you're trying to implement. Did you receive any pushback from the states or the different agencies when you were trying to integrate the disability competency?
One of the practices that I have undertaken at the agency is to provide an anonymous virtual comment box for all staff so that people can share their feedback unencumbered by what, any kind of repercussions. And I occasionally do receive comments that say things like, why do we have to do this? What's the point? Everyone's equal, things like that. So because those comments are anonymous, I take those and try and build some overarching comments into my work to remind people that we live in an uneven playing field and that equity means everyone has what they need in order to survive and persevere through crisis.
Great, thank you. Right, next, we have Beth Meyer. Beth is the Executive Director of the Florida Independent Living Council. She has been there since 2018. Excuse me. Beth was appointed to the Florida Building Commission in 2013, where she worked on the 2014 Florida specific accessibility building codes. And she currently sits on the Accessibility Advisory Council, which reviews any of the waiver requests for the FBC. Beth, the state of Florida is unique, as we have discovered, in which it's one of of the myriad of the emergency management reports that NCD's produced over the years. One theme throughout all of them has been the lack of coordination with the independent living centers before, during, and after disasters with the states. You've managed to create that relationship. In fact, you've got the gas card, as we had talked about, right? It's and by doing so, I mean, you have a roadmap there for other states to aspire to. It's please tell us a little bit about what you did achieve, so everybody else is in on the intel as I am, and how you got there.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and we appreciate the work that happens here at the NCD. We appreciate your work and efforts, and of course, my presentation isn't going to be as eloquent because I had no, I had no rules, so to speak, at the beginning. This started in 2018 when I came after working at a SIL for many years and working as an ADA coordinator, working on a Project Civic Access, so understanding what that looks like at a county level really was very helpful for me. When we started in 2018, we were on the defense after Hurricane Michael. The Mass Care Human Services group and the state EOC heard about our daily calls that I started with our SILs to see if we could help the SIL that was directly impacted. We didn't even know if the executive director had survived because his SIL was directly hit in Panama City. And so we were reaching out to help our colleague is how this all started. And the SILs came together, and we started figuring out that we weren't at the right tables. We were not able to provide appropriate support. And I reached out to to our federal partner at ACL and said, give me some guidance here. I know we're not allowed to provide programmatic work, but we need a very robust communication platform. And so I started these and continued with the daily calls, which showed me all of what I felt like were failures of communication, and the time that it would take for the state to ask for help from a SIL with DME equipment, with interpreters, with services they provide every day, it took too long. And during that disaster, there was a lot of movement of people. And then people don't get to go, they don't get to live in the community that they choose. It was a real problem. And so while we met after the hurricane, and when we did that, we just had a discussion. Let's be real, and this is just with the SILs. What do we do before a storm? What do we do during a storm? What do we do after a storm? And we identified goals and objectives, and we put those in our 2018 spill. And we then have evolved the spill to really create a roadmap. And it's really about being humble enough to capture the failure, and then identifying the failure, and then not doing it again. And the spill has provided the support that the Centers for Independent Living need, that state plan for independent living that every state has, and working with our federal partners, with ACL, we received a lot of support. And there, we identified when we took away the storm and talked about services provided, we really identified some core services that we're already providing. And then we started to understand that we had no data. We had no data. We had no idea of what would be the best way to collect the data. And so then again, we leaned on the spill, the state plan. We have to collect quarterly reports. Okay, how are we collecting those quarterly reports? And it was just like an onion for us. The state plan got us to the table at the state level, which allowed the SILs to do their job. There is no way a Center for Independent Living who was directly impacted by a disaster has the capability to serve the community, take care of the staff and themselves, put the SIL back together, and respond to all kinds of, and go search for who needs help. So what we do at the spill is I take all the information that the governor's putting out. We are welcome and go to the State Emergency Operations Center as soon as they're activated. We know the game plan. We're under Human Services and our comprehensive emergency management plan for our state. There's our access and functional needs, and then there's one non-governmental agency, and it's the Centers for Independent Living. It's not the SILC, it's not the State Independent Living Council. We're not providing the services. So we have to make sure that there's clear communication, that we know who's providing those services. Now we have created a roadmap, and we talk about lessons learned. Now we work with the partnership, and we understand, the SILs are understanding what they need to do to prepare even internally. Their own building, getting a standard, SOPs, and this is what we're going to do to protect everyone. There's communication before the storm hits. Then we take the day, we let the storm pass, and then we hit with 9 o'clock calls every single morning until we can kind of wean, we just kind of assess at that time. We have had access and functional needs coordinators that have been fantastic. During Hurricane Helene, we had, it was myself and another organization that worked to fill that gap because there was nobody there to fill that gap. So if we hadn't been there, then there would have been literally no one. So we work on all of that, but we feel like we have come up with a really good, now we're tracking data. We know who our partners are. We know what the durable medical equipment that goes out. We even had 100% of the durable medical equipment for Hurricane Helene was provided by the Centers for Independent Living and nobody else. And that's a big deal because that's wraparound services also. That also means wraparound services, which means they're connected to the community. I feel like SILs have been marginalized in the efforts after a storm because it can be a big business. And storms are local. So, it starts there. So I look forward to participating with this group.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. And I do plan on follow-up questions after all of the panelists have spoken. So we're going to move on. I've got you all in different order here at the table. I apologize. We're going to run to the far left to Kira next. It's Kira Tiller is our next panelist. She's a sophomore at UNC Chapel Hill. She's the founder and executive director of Disabled Disruptors. Kira authored and successfully lobbied to pass legislation in the state of Virginia to ensure that students with IEPs were provided with emergency evacuation accommodations embedded into their IEPs. So I will hand this over to Kira. Welcome.
Okay, okay, awesome. So hi, my name is Kira Tiller, and I just want to thank Amy and, as well as all the council members for having me here today. It's really a great honor to be able to talk to you all about the initiatives around emergency fire that have really just been forgotten for so long. So I am the executive director of an organization called Disabled Disruptors. I founded this organization during my junior year of high school. We are a student-led national coalition dedicated to advancing disability justice through education policy advocacy. And specifically within education policy, we have really focused on emergency management and the gaps there. And so my legislative advocacy was really inspired by my personal experience as a disabled student. I have epilepsy and flashing lights are one of my triggers. And so fire drills in schools were always a huge challenge and danger for me. And my school never really took this seriously, despite me asking for emergency accommodations in my IEP plan for over 6 years. It was something that was consistently dismissed. I was told that emergency accommodations belonged in a health plan on file with the nurse's office. But the nurse isn't with you when the fire alarm goes off. The health plan is not something that my teachers were informed on, and it's not something that is legally binding the way an IEP is. Throughout middle school, I was put into the counselor's office with no lights to essentially just sit out drills. And I didn't have a plan in high school until my junior year after advocating for many, many years. And so for myself, what I needed was to wear blackout sunglasses. There's these sunglasses I made with black duct tape that I would wear. And I had an aide in the classroom who would guide me out of the building safely while I was closing my eyes and had those glasses on so that I could get out of the building safely and efficiently while not being at risk of having a seizure. And after I founded Disabled Disruptors and had conversations with students across the country about this issue, I realized that this was essentially a universal issue for all students with disabilities. For students like me who had epilepsy and the fire alarms were a danger, for students with sensory disabilities and neurodivergence like autism, many of them were triggered by the loud sounds. For students with mobility disabilities in schools that were not accessible, who may have been on the second or third floor during emergencies. They were often forgotten during evacuations. And so I was kind of shocked at the lack of legislative precedent protecting disabled students during emergency situations. There was even a case with one student, a first grader who was a wheelchair user, and he had an informal plan with his school where a designated staff member would meet him in the hallway and get him out of the building safely. Well, a real fire happened. It was not properly communicated. The designated staff member never met him in the hallway, and firefighters ultimately found him in the building. And thank God he survived. But if they hadn't been there, he easily could have died. And so this is really a life or death issue for disabled students. And so in my home state of Virginia, I wrote a bill ensuring that emergency accommodations are offered to every student with an IEP plan, and that for 504 teams, that the State Department of Education offer guidance and support to 504 teams to also develop emergency plans for students with 504s. And I introduced this, I got this in legislation introduced in the 2024 session of the Virginia General Assembly. And I worked with a lot of coalitions to do this. I was actually initially introduced to the legislator who first introduced my bill at a disability voting rights press conference hosted by Rev Up, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is the voting rights branch of AAPD, and they have a very strong chapter in my state. And so we both spoke at this press conference, and then afterwards I talked to this Virginia delegate. His name was Rodney Willett, and he introduced this bill in the 2024 session. Unfortunately, it didn't pass in 2024 because I think a lot of legislators didn't fully understand this issue and kind of thought that this wasn't needed and that this was already happening. And so throughout the rest of 2024, we mobilized students, parents, teachers, as well as the Virginia SIL and local SILs to educate legislators, Virginia legislators on this issue and why it is so important. And then I reintroduced this legislation in the 2025 session with Delegate Laura Jane Cohen, who had previously had experience serving on the Fairfax County School Board and had disabled children, and so she was intimately familiar with this issue. And in the 2025 session, I'm pleased to announce it passed out of the Virginia House of Delegates and the Virginia State Senate unanimously, and it was signed into law by the governor. This is such a huge victory, for disabled students, for parents, for educators, and for anyone who cares, about children not being left behind to die. So this is something that we really want to expand across the country because, like I mentioned earlier, it's just a gap in education policy that so many people just haven't even, or so many people have just already assumed that this is something that is and this initiative Congress's office on introducing a bill to address this. And so, yeah, we're hoping, we're going to keep pushing federally and across the country to ensure that disabled students don't have to be afraid in their schools and can focus on learning and can feel like their safety is not an afterthought in their schools.
Wow, thank you, Kira. Definitely have some follow-up questions for you as well. I'm going to save those for a little bit later. Next on the panel, we have Dr. Lydia Fonseca. I hope I said your last name right. She's the executive director at Valley Association for Independent Living in Texas. It's an independent living center that provides services to people in South Texas region. Sorry, duplicating myself there. Lydia, thank you so much for being here. I'm hand it over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation, Amy, and to the council. I'm so happy to be here and alongside my colleagues who do some amazing work. So thank you for that. Yes, so I am the executive director of our Center for Independent Living in the South Texas region. We do have 27 centers in our state. We are a large state in Texas, but we do cover all of the South Texas region. And the way that our center has been involved in emergency preparedness started off with attending a all hazards conference that our region was doing, our county was doing. They called it a South Texas All Hazards Conference. And we submitted a proposal to present, right? To present to first responders, because that was the audience there. And to talk about, you know, what people with disabilities truly need and what the, you know, what the differences may be when you're encountering a person with a disability and you're providing first response. So when we presented there, and this was about 7 years ago, it was one of the most, I guess, the most a lot of participants attended. And they did reach out to the conference committee and said that they needed more of that, more education on how to work with persons with disabilities. So then that led to us forming what they call an inclusive response committee with our local county health department. And we were basically at the table in co-hosting this conference now because they wanted to know, they wanted us at the table to see how can they integrate inclusiveness and folks with disabilities in different ways, not just in presentations and educating first responders, but the conference itself, logistics. So what that meant now is for 7 years, we've had a conference that is the most largely attended in the nation in terms of a all hazards conference. We get over 4,000 people that attend this conference because it is free to first responders and to the community. And so now this conference has an accommodations table. It has a room, a sensory room. It has all the things that we're so used to in our world that we should have, and now it is being implemented in more of a public space where folks are not used to, and they're getting, you know, an idea of what it means to have a really inclusive space. We also what's important about this conference is that now at least 70% of the presentations involve how to work and how to talk to folks with disabilities and different types of disabilities. So it started with one presentation, which was cross disability, and now there's different specific panels that how to work with persons who are deaf and hard of hearing, or how to work with somebody who may have a physical disability or cognitive. And so it's really specialized, and first responders from different areas, like firefighters, the police department, our local U.S. Customs and Homeland folks can do when they're helping the community, right? And one of the things that we implemented now at the conference is a basic ASL for first responders course that they all are part of, and it's part of the main plenary session. So everybody gets to take that, right? And so new first responders that come in are able to learn just basic ASL depending on their area in first responders. Another thing that we did implement at this conference, we wanted to make a presentation on the critical incident response training. So if you guys are familiar with that, that's essentially an active shooter training for civilians. This happened in our state after there's been a lot of school shootings, right? But I want to say it was about 5 years ago. And we worked with our local county sheriff's department to kind of see, well, okay, you have this implemented as a critical incident response training that is used across the nation, across the state. But how are you considering the needs of students with disabilities in the school or in the workplace, employees with disabilities, right? And so we kind of sat down at the table and redesigned the training to be iSearch, which essentially is called Inclusive Critical Incident Response Training. And we brought folks from different parts of our area that had different types of disabilities, and we ran through the curriculum, which is essentially run, hide, fight. And in each section, we talked about, okay, if somebody is nonverbal, if somebody has a mobility device, how are they going to do these things that you're recommending in each of these sections? And so they were all able to provide that feedback. And so we were able to redesign this iCert and start implementing that at our local level. Also related to that, if y'all are familiar with the I Love You Guys Foundation, they created the poster that most school districts use that shows how to shelter in place in case there's an active shooter, or if there's weather emergency outside, the different kinds of things to do, which is an amazing resource. But we felt that it needed to be redesigned for people with different types of disabilities. So we were able to redesign it using plain language and images so that if a student with a disability is walking down the hall, something's happening, they know the direction and those instructions in that poster. And so that was implemented also at the South Texas All Hazard Conference as a presentation and training. And then from there, it just kind of boomed and people requested more information on that in education. Another thing that we worked on that came out of the Inclusive Response Committee is CERT, so Community Emergency Response Team, right? So that's essentially civilians, community members that get trained on how to be kind of first at the scene, right? If something happens in your community and you have this training, to how to kind of assess before the first responders get there. It's a fire safety, how to use, fire extinguisher, applying first aid, light search and rescue, those kinds of things. And so we had all of our center staff, which is 27 staff, get trained to be CERT certified. And part of that led to having the first deaf CERT team in our state. I'm not really sure if there are other states that have had that, but we got folks who were deaf trained in this. And when we went through the training, we identified some of the curriculum and how it may not really work for somebody who doesn't use English as a first language or who uses American Sign Language, right? For example, in the light search and rescue part, if the person in the building is deaf and you're being told that what you should do is call out their name because it's unsafe to go into a building to see if they're there, obviously they're not able to hurt you. So simple things that we were able to introduce is using a flashlight, using a whistle, or knocking or coming in, right? Or if the person who is conducting the light search and rescue is deaf themselves, they were able to use those resources as well. And so we're really trying to push for more people in our local community to be CERT certified. And one of the things that we did is with our local county emergency department is that we started a year-long, started in March to November, emergency preparedness pop-up events. And essentially that is around the different precincts and cities in our county. We would have these events in the rural areas because we're very rural in the South Texas region. And we would have the community come in and they would learn on tips for hurricane safety, extreme heat safety, and then our center was able to provide emergency kits to the people there and train them on how to use it. And then on top of that, include in these kits accessible items like grip aids or anything that may be needed for somebody with a certain type of disability, and train them on how to use these kits. So a lot of the times people may put a kit together or purchase a kit, but they really don't know how to use it until something happens, right? So having that education there. We had a flash flood happen in March in our area in particular, and it just so happened to be the day we were at the South Texas All Hazards Conference. So all first responders were in this one building when this flash flood happened in the South Texas region in March. In the matter of 30 seconds, the water rose and everything was flooded where we were at in the area. And after that, flooding is when we decided to put together or work with our county, and they started to do the pop-up events. Fast forward 3 months later in July, we have that devastating flood in the center of Texas, right? And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we're trying to hopefully implement this at the statewide level because we're only in the South Texas region. But of course, every area, every county that we see is unique to their needs. So we really feel like a toolkit that can implement that is going to be amazing. It's going to be able to prepare people and kind of take bits and pieces and what works for them. And I'm just really happy be here, and I'm excited to work on this. with you guys.
Thank you, Lydia. We're happy to have you. I'm looking forward to using your knowledge and to help inform the toolkit. So thank you. It's and last but not least, we have Herman Parati from the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. Herman is co-executive director as the nation's Disability and Disaster Hub. Partnership's been leading the way to further advance the rights, needs, and inclusion of people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters and emergencies, not only across the U.S., but around the world. Herman, thank you for being here. Partnership is unique and when it's compared to the other panelists because he and they coordinate with everyone, every state, every territory, every tribe. They've got the pulse of all of them that they can tell some stories. It's so I mean, Herman, you're uniquely situated to know what works and what doesn't work at a statewide level. Unfortunately, more of what doesn't work. It's and so would love to hear what you've seen, what you'd recommend that every state should have, what they should do, and why.
Herman, thank you, Amy, for inviting me to this panel along with great colleagues here. And thank you, Chairman and members of the council for allowing me to provide comments today. As the only U.S. disability-led nonprofit organization focused solely on the rights and needs of people with disabilities and people with access to functional needs, we convene local disability organizations, advocates, emergency managers, public health officials, and other stakeholders. We deliver disability-led disaster response, training, technical assistance, and policy advocacy. My comments today will cover why disability and access and functional needs integration must be system-wide, how an access and functional needs coordinator adds value to each emergency support function, the asset of disability-led community-based organizations, an essential element of a state toolkit for disability and access and functional needs integration. Our recommendations reflect the partnership's direct experience supporting disabled disaster survivors and incorporates insights from trusted sources. Federal civil rights law requires states and local government to provide equal access to emergency programs. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 prohibit discrimination and require effective communication, reasonable modification, and accessible facilities. 1 in 4 people in the United States have a disability, and people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to be injured or die in disasters than non-disabled people. In the wake of the hurricanes in 2017, the Government Accountability Office found that FEMA's efforts were inconsistent. Regional offices lacked clear procedures for integrating disability advisors and had not provided sufficient training, leaving states and local managers ill prepared to serve people with disabilities. FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination has worked to close such persistent access gaps. As FEMA moves to the functions of ODIC now to the Office of Civil Rights within FEMA, the statutory responsibilities of the disability coordinator established in 6 USC Section 321B must continue. And consistent with the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, the coordinator must report directly to the administrator. The disability coordinator's duties include consulting with organizations representing people with disabilities to inform planning and relief efforts, and NCD as well. Since the departure of the outgoing ODIC director, Dr. Sherman Gillums Jr., and on March of this year, and subsequently his acting administrator, Elizabeth Edge, since June of this year, there has been no communication from ODIC to us that we have a great relationship, or anyone that we can really speak to. However, at the state level, we are seeing adoption of whole community approaches Tasha was sharing some of them earlier in Oregon. Two other great examples to follow are Colorado and Nevada, which operationalized this approach by staffing state-level access and functional needs coordinator or relevant staff who apply the CMIS framework. CMIS stands for communication, maintaining health, independence, safety, support, self-determination, and transportation. Integrating a dedicated access and functional needs coordinator at the EOC will access across with access across each emergency support function is critical to translate federal guidance into practice. The National Response Framework organizes federal, state, and local response into 15 different emergency support functions. In my written comments, I'll provide examples of how this work can be integrated into each ESF, but to go over a couple of them. The first emergency support function is transportation. We need for the access and functional needs staff to support this ESF lead in coordinating transportation to ensure evacuation plans include wheelchair accessible buses and other equipment that provides access to people with disabilities. And they need to be trained on how to provide the service, including how to engage with animal support animal and service animal handlers. In communications, second ESF, we must ensure that emergency alerts in every mode, including press briefings and public service announcements, are actionable and provide captioning, American Sign Language interpreters, and are in plain language and multilingual format. ESF 6 is a very important one. It's called Mass Care, Emergency Assistance, Temporary Housing, and Human Services. There, we must ensure that mass care sites are accessible and provide and use the CMS framework during intake. This will allow workers to quickly identify access and functional needs that are not being met and can quickly procure what is needed to support them. ESF 8, Public Health and Medical Services, needs to work on coordinating and streamlining process for replacing medications and lost durable medical equipment, not only in healthcare settings, but also in the community. And with this, coordinating personal assistance services at home, continuity, and oxygen are priorities that we see in every disaster as common threats that happen again and again, the most common denominator. Talking about common denominators, the loss of power is essential in being mitigated. The work with utilities needs to happen in developing programs like California has and Colorado has around providing alternative power backup sources for households using life-sustaining equipment. And for organizations like my colleagues here that support communities during disasters, supporting their fueling, which oftentimes can be the difference of being able to provide a service or not. We have heard of different ways that the independent living network becomes an asset to emergency managers. A couple of other examples come from Puerto Rico. The Center for Independent Living there, MAVI, has worked since Maria across the island with partners to supply emergency services, including the distribution of essential supplies during disasters, generators, and members of the core advisory group that has a representation across the island that can coordinate support when one area is affected. They also provide solar energy education since the power grid since Maria has completely failed. Wisconsin, the independent living network there leads emergency preparedness efforts, a published toolkit for the community and voluntary access of providing individual access and functional needs gaps. So finding a two-way communication is crucial during disaster. And in California, Disability Rights Network there, Disability Rights California, provides major help during disasters and following and supporting people with disabilities, appeal to FEMA and other programs when they are denied. They also help people with disabilities find programs that they are eligible to during disaster. They also work with the Statewide Access and Functional Needs Council. It works with the investor-owned utilities to make sure that they support people with disabilities. This demonstrates that disability-led organizations, particularly community-based, consistently deliver essential emergency protective measures during disaster. In building a toolkit, centering equity in all phases is essential. Use equity as a foundational lens across preparedness, response and recovery, and mitigation. Prioritize access to services, information, and sheltering. And talking about equity, in 2021, FEMA defined equity as the consistent and systemic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. As we close today, I want to make sure that clear recommendations to the council are mentioned. We need in every state and large local emergency management agency a designated access and functional needs staff as part of the EOC structure. And this role needs to be codified in state plans. We need to request that FEMA and DOJ provide technical assistance and enforcement to ensure states and local agencies comply with the ADA and Section 504 obligations. Many jurisdictions still lack accessible shelters and communication. We saw that as a major fall in Kerrville, Texas flooding. We need to encourage the development of a national model for access and functional needs integration across the ESF, adaptable by states and localities. And we need to promote metrics and account by recommending that on how they are meeting the needs of people with disabilities. And FEMA should publish a report that includes this information and how they themselves are providing services to people with disabilities in an accessible fashion. In closing, as part of each emergency support function, detailing and describing the roles and equipping states with comprehensive toolkits to significantly improve the outcomes for people with disabilities, people with access and functional needs after disasters. At the partnership, we are ready to support the council, states, and localities in implementing this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Herman. And I will take you up on that. It's a couple follow-up questions I did have for many of you. Any of y'all can jump in. Oh, Theo, do you have?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go for it. It's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. You may ask one that I'm
I
going to
have
ask.
two,
so
actually
that-
two questions.
Go for it.
One to come on. Did I hear you say that since June, with Sherman position been eliminated, you haven't had a lot of work with FEMA?
With the office, Herman, specifically with the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. Other parts of FEMA, like individual assistance, continue engaging, but ODIC has the role, the responsibility by statutory requirement to engage the community. And since June, we have seen zero.
All right, second follow-up. This is to any of you all. I guess I got a little bias here, but would you say that Centers for Independent Living are essential to any emergency preparedness team?
Absolutely.
All right. And right now, you don't see that being utilized enough?
No, and I don't, this is Lydia, I don't see that being utilized enough, one across the nation, one within the state, and then even within your proper, your service area, which many counties are involved. And I think that's why this toolkit is essential, because it'll provide a roadmap to integrate that smoothly and identify the correct partners.
This is Beth. I'm just going to add that the Centers for Independent Living have been really doing this work with no way of collecting data for forever. They've already been doing this work. And so what you see is they're just doing their thing. And so what we're trying to do, and I hope this is going to be a great opportunity for us, is really to say, you know, the state help out those centers, the silks, and then you know who your players are, you know, your access and functional needs, but be at the table. What I found was when we put our centers for independent living, and they were all part of this by us identifying what they already did, when we put it in the state plan, it kind of codified it a little bit, and we are able, because they have to report, we were able to actually create a data that had never been collected, because they have to report on questions in the state plan. And so we were asking questions to understand the roadmap. And now we have the first ever comprehensive emergency data collection through SIL Suite that the SILs use already. And we just pulled it all together to share. But they have to be able to get credit for the work that they do. And they've been doing it. So I think the SILs are a huge part of the solution.
So can I follow up on that? So I actually serve on a board of the Kern County Center for Independent Living. And so when you say the SEALs being a part of that, is there funding out there for the SEALs? Because I know Kern County, the Center for Independent Living, is overwhelmed as it is with all the work that they're currently doing, and then to take on more. So,
yeah.
So or is that something
I don't
we
believe
need?
it's funding. I think she is sort of hinting to that.
Yeah, no,
that
I'm direct.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Get me over there.
But
So,
they're doing it regardless.
right.
But I think an important aspect of that is recognizing that they play an important role.
Oh, absolutely.
And should be the first contact when anybody has experience in regard to disaster.
I think it's a whole community team that has to be important, but yes, and the SEALs have to be a part of that. But
Yeah.
so is there funding available, or is that something that needs to happen? That's what I'm.
Something that needs to happen.
Yeah.
I think ACL is sort of acknowledging that.
They did provide money to assist with Hurricane Ian survivors, but it was, you know, a little bit after the storm had happened. There was a funding that was available, and the Centers for Independent Living used that and applied for that funding because it was through the Part C, but it was a significant. It was $3.5 million that ACL, you know, at that time, you know, had contributed. But it's diversion and transition in the purest sense of what the spirit of diversion and transition is. And so they're already doing the work on a fifth core service that is an unfunded mandate. So are they getting paid for this? No. Do they do the work? Yes. Why? Because they're centers for independent living, you know.
And that's something that NCD has recommended, I think, in almost every emergency management report that we've had over the last decade, is that the independent living centers need to be funded. That we've been working with FEMA to have FEMA work. I know to have I see Beth shaking her head. To have FEMA work with the counties to get MOUs together so that you can get paid for services provided, and we're not there yet.
This is Herman. Couple of other points are within FEMA, it could work to recognize Centers for Independent Living and other independent living network organizations as private nonprofits that provide protective measures during disasters. We have seen one Center for Independent Living in Pennsylvania get reimbursed from FEMA for this. We have seen Centers for Independent Living in Florida get denied for doing this. So there is a discrepancy that still needs to be worked on.
So I'm sorry. So you're saying that they receive money after the fact?
Yes.
So do the job, but don't get compensated until something actually bad happens.
In a federal
Or not.
reimbursement
Yeah.
way.
Okay.
Yeah. But also, I would add that we are working to reintroduce the real Emergency Access for Aging and Disability Inclusion Act for Disasters, READY, which NCD has supported in the past. And we are working with Congress to introduce it by the end of September. It will have two new sections. One to codify into statute the monies that Beth was talking about. We're discussing 100 million per year for response as grants available, and that hopefully ACL will administer, but also preparedness grants at the amount of 300,000 million a year. Localities will be qualified for this, but there is specific work that it's like this is for people with disabilities, peer support, work that the IL network is strongly qualified on.
Great job, everybody. Thank you. You all hear me? First, Kira, I just have to say, I'm blown away by what you've done as a student. I worked for the New York State Legislature for 28 and a half years, and I can count on one hand bills moving that quickly and getting sent to the left. So pat yourself on the back. Strongly suspect we will hear your name in the future. And I'm bringing back to New York your idea for having that type of thing put into IEP. So I just was blown away. Congratulations. Question on the toolkit that both you guys have mentioned. In New York, we have toolkits. I strongly suspect that many other states must, but I think it would be something that maybe we could talk a little bit more here, that nationally, there is a list of things that go into these toolkits. Can you guys tell us what types of disability items you've added? Because I suspect some are just for everybody, right? What types of different disability type items?
So the toolkit that I was mentioning is the one that's being recommended by this council to write. So I haven't done one yet, but we've done other toolkits for other kinds of things, but not for what I was speaking about today, is getting together at the table with all of us that are here to put everything that has worked very well in each of our respective fields into this tangible material that states can use and have a roadmap.
The one I'm referring to in particular, the one where you have the pop-up event.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just mentioned something about grippers, because we have something similar, but I think that this is something that all
Yes.
states should have. What do you guys include in those?
So in like the emergency kits,
Yes,
is that what
sorry,
you meant? I'm
yes,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's a four person 3-day emergency kit, and in our area it's hurricane and flooding mostly. So it'll be items that are more related to that kind of stuff. We have in that emergency toolkit there's MREs, so prepared meals. We have, if they do want to add to their kit like canned and non-perishable foods. We also add like grip aids and how to be able to open those up a little bit easier. We at our center have a Braille machine, so we put in there a resource, like different community resources that they can look for, and we put it in Braille in Spanish, and we also do ASL. So we have a good amount of staff who are deaf and hard of hearing who use American Sign Language as their first language. And what we do a lot, we work a lot with the county, but specifically for the kits, is we'll get the material, the resource book, and we'll have our staff translate it in ASL, and then we'll put a QR code on each page, and so people are able to access the information in ASL. So those are some examples that we include.
Great, thank you so much.
Go ahead, Beth.
If I can add just one thing, in our state plan, when we were collecting, we asked which one of the CILs were providing emergency preparedness conferences, and what did they do at the conference, and that was some of the data that we collected. All of the CILs had created an emergency preparedness kind of conference, and it's for the county, and it's a great opportunity for individuals to come in, and it's really about the county people learning about who lives in their community. They sometimes knowing who lives in your county when you're a county official is the biggest lesson that is learned, but it brings everyone together. We set up like mock shelters so that they can see how not happy they are and but it's a mock shelter, and so what to prepare and what to bring, and then they put together their individual personalized kind of checklist, a priority of what they need when they evacuate, and kind of working through the decisions of evacuating or sheltering in place. What does that look like? When can you do that? Who do you listen to? And they put together these little bags of survival things. And so most of the SILs do that. Does it happen in every county, even though we have statewide coverage? No, it doesn't. Some of the rural counties are really challenging. So, you know, that's a big focus for us, are those rural farming communities. They're very, a disaster in a rural community is so much harder than if it hits a populated area.
Great. All right, I'm going to ask a few questions. Anyone else? Did you? Oh, I saw your mic. Sorry.
Hi, thank you all. Very, very interesting and good work. Several years ago, we were talking about shelters and the issues about shelters and the accessibility of shelters. And NCD was very concerned about that. At some point, we wrote a letter to HUD, and they were asking for comments on CBDG funds. We raised these issues to them about unnecessary institutionalizations after disasters, people that had homes that were accessible to them that were destroyed, often could not go back to those homes. They didn't have the funds to make them accessible again, and they couldn't find temporary housing that was accessible. And then the shelters weren't accessible, and people ended up getting put in nursing homes or other assisted living facilities, and then they couldn't get out because there wasn't anywhere to go to after. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing that that is still going on today, and if states have been more willing to recognize responsibility for making these shelters accessible and providing what needs to be provided. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. This is Natasha.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay.
It's just, we've talked about it before, and I know Natasha, you talked about the equitable, ensuring accessibility and equitability of shelters. So as you're answering what Anna was asking, I also would like to know, there's always been the issue of who's responsible for ensuring the accessibility of shelters. What steps has Oregon taken that, I mean, anyone else can answer, the different states have taken to ensure that the emergency shelters are accessible?
Thank you, and I look forward to hearing some insight from this panel as well. Oregon Emergency Management does work closely with the Department of Human Services to ensure that mass care and congregate sheltering practices are inclusive and accessible to everyone. The state has developed a detailed tool template that guides local jurisdictions in setting up shelters through an equity and trauma-informed lens. The tool outlines step-by-step practices for ensuring physical accessibility, including entrances, restrooms, sleeping areas, dining spaces, and so on. And also for providing communication access through various interpreting services, alternate formats for information and accessible signage, things of that nature. And they also require shelters to plan for access and functional needs support services, including backup power for medical devices and durable medical equipment, refrigeration for medications and personal assistance services, and accommodations for service animals. And the goal is for people with disabilities to stay with their families and caregivers in shelters and maintain independence and dignity while receiving the same level of safety and care as everyone else. And when it comes to responsibility for accessibility and sheltering and evacuation, I think it is a matter of to some degree of sharing responsibility with the Department of Human Services, the Health Authority, and emergency support function leads. Each must contribute to standard setting and guidelines, for example. And nonprofits and community-based organizations must bring critical experience and expertise. Of course, local emergency managers and partners like the Red Cross do deliver those services on the ground. But my role at Oregon Emergency Management is to be accountable for ensuring that those accessibility standards are in place. And if a shelter is going to be listed in my agency's public information materials or on our GIS tool so that the public can see where those shelters are, we must include information on what accessibility services and features are in that shelter. What services and equipment they can expect, what accommodations are for service animals, and so on. And we also do work with the Red Cross and other volunteer agencies on training volunteers and orienting them with the CMIS tools for shelter intake practices as well, so that people visiting shelters can be triaged and their needs met immediately. I think I'll pause there and just let people contribute if you like.
Probably going to have responses from everyone on this one. It's so shelters. It's very interesting because we have two shelters in Florida. We have the general pop and the medical slash special needs shelter, which I know is where people register to go to, and so that's a whole separate really discussion. However, those are usually, they all have electrical generated batteries. They all have, they also are working with the Department of Health and other state organizations. And those shelters have many times have a hospital possibly sponsoring that shelter. So they're only open, and they're all in schools except for maybe two. And so the thing in Florida is, which we found so interesting, is shelters open. People, we had over 88,000 people in shelters for Milton. I mean, that's good, right? People are seeking safety. 88,000 people, unheard of. We see a mass exodus. Okay, like literally everyone goes home within 48 hours. Nobody is staying in the shelter if they don't have to. And so that's where our sills, and it's people, we've almost gone through it so many times that people are trained, go home. Okay, it's passed, go home. That's where our sills are coming in with generators and other things to help people stay at home if they can. We also, the other great thing about our spill is when we are writing it for the disaster component is we found a disaster reveals systemic barriers really quick. It's like you can take all the other stuff, all the fluff and stuff off because it just shows you the raw truth. And so where our centers, what were they doing with housing? Now we have a lot of our centers are working on housing. Some of them were approved to receive SHIP dollars, which meant that our center was replacing the house that was damaged for their consumer, making it right so that they could get home. So it's a interesting trend to see how the community responds to disasters. Sheltering is the long-term shelters are these mega shelters that pop up when all of the general pop and everything else closes. But everybody gets to go home. Everyone is taken back to their community, and we and some of our centers review the mega shelters to make sure that they're accessible. A lot of them will bring in DME and support to get people out of the shelter as soon as possible. It's very complicated, but the community knows the longer you stay in the shelter, the more likely you are to be moved. So they go home.
This is Lydia. Yeah, I'd like to add that, well, at least in our area, so we had Winter Storm Uri in 2021, right? Um, Unheard of in our state, where our entire state was not ready, obviously, for the power grid. And one of the things that we were seeing was that folks, well, first of all, there were at least 200 deaths, and half of those were persons with disabilities and people who were older. And from that percentage, about half of those were because the lack of electricity and the medical devices that were needed, right? So there was a lot of talks of how we could address that, and it's still ongoing. Folks who couldn't continue at home because of the lack of electricity and they needed specific equipment to be on power were trying to get into shelters, but because it was hurting everyone, they weren't able to get in because shelters were packed. And so they were forced to go back home where they couldn't use life-saving equipment. Another thing that we saw is people were being turned away because of their service animals, and certain shelters were listed as not having any pets. But having to educate folks who are in these shelters and letting them know service animals are different, you know, it's not a pet, or whatever the case may be, was a barrier. But it's talks, we're having those talks now, and they're reaching out to us, to SILS, to have those conversations, to ensure that that does not happen again. And if they are going to list a specific area or place or building as a potential shelter, they're reaching out to us to conduct ADA accessibility assessments to ensure that they're ready to go.
This is Vermont. So it will be per state, per area, how good, how ready are shelters equipped to support people with disabilities and our different access and functional needs. During Helene, Georgia and the Carolinas, without having dedicated staff and strong, cohesive involvement between the disability organizations and emergency management, we saw people on oxygen who had no more way to get replacement oxygen during those initial critical days. Some had to go to fire stations every 2 hours to get it refilled. Some ended having to go to a hospital, and that opens up a pipeline to institutionalization. That hospital wants to decompress as quickly as possible. There needs to be also a clear look into housing. We are still dealing and supporting folks from Maui and the wildfire there. And not only that many cannot return home because the timeliness is just not there, but also programs like FEMA's direct lease program, which increased the rent 300 times, right, 300-fold. So housing is a critical issue, but while we work on sustainable housing for mass casualty, mass understand that they have to comply with the needs of their community. That be communication, physical access, or just dietary needs, because that's also a big one. And thinking, also mentioned Puerto Rico, and dealing with issues like cabotage laws that don't allow resources to rapidly enter into the island after disasters, don't allow shelters to have proper fuel for their survival.
Thank you, Herman. One thing I did want to ask too, Beth, again, the state plan that was created in Florida is pretty impressive. It's, Natasha, I'm going to put you on the spot. It's, what would Oregon need to do to create a state plan similar, inclusive of the independent living centers as is set up in Florida?
always need more resources. For Oregon to replicate something like the Florida CEMP, we would need clearer statutory requirements in our Oregon State Statute 401 to assign agency leadership roles and mandate regular updates and regional coordination. We will also need to embed disability and access and functional needs into every emergency and recovery support function, which we are currently in the process of doing through our ESF and RSF annexes as we update our comprehensive emergency management plan, so that sheltering, evacuation, medical care, and communications are all designed with accessibility built in. And another way that Oregon could strengthen our comprehensive emergency plan in the direction of Florida's model is by leaning on our continuity of operations planning. That requires every agency to think through essential functions and alternate facilities, accessible communications, and how to sustain operations for people who rely on those services, which naturally aligns with the emergency support function and recovery support function structure in a comprehensive emergency management plan. Because if each agency already knows its critical functions and continuity needs, including how it will meet disability and access and functional needs, then it becomes much easier to formalize, codify, and assign those responsibilities within a statewide plan. So I think, in short, a robust continuity of operations planning framework would build some of that operational muscle and accountability that Oregon would allow a more comprehensive perspective that could work in Oregon. But it does require a legislative component, and that is something that I will need Kira's help with.
We have somebody on the panel
Yes.
who is well versed in writing legislative language.
Absolutely. One thing I would like, this is Beth, to add is that if the SILs are in the state comprehensive emergency management plan as one of those NGO partners in our state, that means that the SILs have access to fuel, free fuel. That means interpreters get free fuel to go out to wherever. That means also propane. That means they're able to fill up propane tanks and take them out to the community so people can stay in their home. So they don't have to go into a shelter. Maybe that, they might need, we might not have power for 2 weeks, but then what are we doing? If we don't have gas, because the SILs have such a little budget for fuel and gas, they could blow through that in like 2 days if there's a disaster. So the Centers for Independent Living receive a curfew pass, which allows them to travel in the area that is impacted. We also have memorandums between the SILs that they can go outside of their catchment area if that is needed to help the other SIL. And they go in there and they are able to get to fuel up, bring gas for generators. And because the number one thing is our SILs are operating, since people are leaving shelters so soon. People that we're trying to get the SILs up so that they're really acting like generator stations. And they all have portable generators that they can take out to the community if there's someone that's not able to come in. They're driving in and charging up with whatever, whether durable medical equipment, CPAP machines, and then coming out. We have really cool solar panel generators that are really neat. And that you just lay the solar panels out. It's like a briefcase. And those have been very helpful for keeping people at home. SILs are bringing water, food. They're just dropping it off because because they don't want to leave their home. They might have left the home for safety and now they're back. But, during Hurricane Helene, I didn't have power for 2 weeks. Right. And so that's just the nature of it. You can expect 2 weeks out. But our SILs have satellite phones that the Phil bought. We can communicate with them immediately, and we have a good idea of what their needs are. But fuel was a big one, and this is by being a partner with the state, we had access to that.
I really want to go back to Natasha's point around when we're building access and functional needs into emergency operation plans. It's not about building a separate annex for ESF. No, it needs to be integrated into each and every one about how they are going to meet the needs of people with disabilities and people with access and functional needs. Again and again, we see state plans that might have an annex that nobody ever opens with 3 pages that says barely anything. And doesn't account for how each area have plans that say in the morning and in the evening, they'll pick up the trash at the EOC. It needs to include how they're going to support people with disabilities.
Carrie, I do have a question for you. You did talk about the federal legislation that you've been working with Congress. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Where it's at, where it stands now, and what your hopes are, or the direction it's heading in?
Okay, so I can't speak directly on legislation, but I can speak on the direction. I think the first avenue that makes sense, so within support that have what for the act on to the end. The existing structure. Into the would just fit into that existing section, and it would also ensure that, you know, if a student doesn't need a plan, well, then that's easy. Then you just agree that, you know, the student and the family communicate that they don't need a plan, and then you move on. For the first avenue. The second avenue, ESEA, or, you know, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and through this you could go through Title I, Part A, which covers like funding and grants, and it kind of sets expectations for how states and districts will meet students' needs and ensure equitable access to education. So thought that this would be kind of a good place to put it. And with this, we would just, in that section, essentially require states and LEAs, or local education agencies, to include emergency preparedness protocols. So both of these fitting into an existing framework, very simple and straightforward, kind of makes a lot of sense in the existing framework. So I go about it. I'm not, I can't personally speak to anything that's in the bill.
Understood. I look forward to seeing the language when it is introduced.
Yes, I will be sure to keep you all posted.
And one thing, as I've been saying, that this panel is being used as a springboard for the creation of the emergency management toolkit for states, territories, tribal lands, the whole gamut. I'd like for each of y'all to take a few minutes just to let me know what you want to see included, what is integral, what should be included in this toolkit.
I'll go ahead, I guess. Just break the awkward silence. This is Natasha, and I myself would I'm thinking of this from my selfish benefit, for one, as someone who's still relatively new to the emergency management ecosystem, and I would love to see a replicable model and an implementation framework that's reflected in state law. In Oregon, we are currently writing this from scratch, but it has proven to be a slow and heavy lift to engage the legislature in developing and funding a uniform set of accessibility standards that can be applied across all of our 36 counties and 9 federally recognized tribes. So a national toolkit that provides sample statutory language would be hugely beneficial to us in Oregon, as well as funding strategies We've talked about this a lot this morning, and some implementation guidance that would help states move much more quickly and with greater consistency, because the consistency is something we always lack. And of course, having an AFN coordinator or equity coordinator or officer embedded in every ECC and EOC would be something that I think would be hugely beneficial.
Okay, I would also, this is Beth, for the toolkit, I think identifying partners, identifying funding opportunity, because, and really kind of outline, I think there should be an opportunity for growth, like a toolkit that, you know, takes you to where the state is. Not every state's ready to go. And they don't respond to disasters exactly the same. But I think the focusing on some of the states that are just getting, you know, experiencing unbelievable disasters, you know, looking at them for, you know, some, as you're doing, looking for some guidance for this. But I think we need to kind of identify roles. You know, it's hard to have a conversation with a SIL and not have any funding because they're losing money left and right. However, let's figure out how we can support it, because it's, they're doing it, they're doing the work, but what they could do so much more. And having an expectation of encouraging state councils to collect the data. And it's the data is going to tell the story. The data, you know, we talk GIS mapping, you know, people move after disasters. I find that very interesting. And we like to know where they move and where are they moving to, and are they coming back? So you see an influx of population all over the place. There's a lot of research that needs to kind of go into it too, but supporting actions in this toolkit and laying out some possibility, what they could do is going to be really important. And I think having a couple options is going to be critical. So, but very, very exciting.
So this is Lydia, ditto to both of them. And really what I imagine this toolkit to look like. What purpose does it serve, and who's it going to serve to most, right? This is going to go to states. Office of Emergency Management, how can they implement this, right? So I think focusing on that audience and what they need, not all states and not all, even if a state is familiar with what Centers for Independent Living do, or what organizations that provide services to people with disabilities do, that's not the same case throughout the entire state. So this toolkit, of course, needs to have definitions, needs to have information about the different organizations that are out there and what they already do, right? What we've been talking about. And then also provide examples of how it has worked in other areas, so they can then see what this toolkit can potentially do for them. So ensuring that all of that is included in there. And then I think, you know, like I've mentioned before, we have all the ingredients here at the table for the perfect recipe to ensure that this toolkit is a good roadmap, a good guidance for the states to use to start moving forward in their comprehensive emergency management plan for each state.
This is Herman, and colleagues have said great things. A few points to add. It's been mentioned, but finding ways to compensate appropriately community-based organizations that are supporting the emergency management field, and for the emergency management field to have clear ways of understanding of the obligations they need to meet and how to go about it. But also, and remiss me if we don't mention adding mental health continuity models, concepts like accessible crisis counseling, sensory-friendly spaces, telebehavioral options, and continuity for existing care, and also survey the community to understand their access and functional needs, not only ahead of time, so you can learn what are their needs, what are their language needs, what are the dietary needs in the community, but also soon after the disaster. Sometimes the response goes on for months, and not everyone has a way to provide their information to and their needs to emergency management. So finding ways to open up those ways of communication.
Well, wow, you guys all had such great recommendations, and I guess I'm more on the education side of this. So, kind of talking about schools, I think it's really important to kind of also focus on the physical accessibility portion of this and guidance to states on how to implement accessible emergency evacuation equipment to school districts and the differing needs of school districts, whether it's a more affluent urban district or suburban district, or if it's maybe a more rural district that might need more guidance and funding and support, and how states can set implementation timelines with funding support, and what that looks like for different regions, different ecosystems between states, and then surveys to that school districts can administer to assess gaps in emergency preparedness in schools, and having surveys, not only for students and parents, but also for teachers. So, questions like, have you been asked whether you or your child need emergency accommodations? If so, was the plan followed? How well was it followed? Have you or your child been meaningfully included in the process of developing that plan? And then for teachers also, have they been meaningfully included in developing that plan? And were they properly informed and supported in implementing that plan? And also in terms of emergency evacuation equipment, assessing whether the staff, the designated staff or personnel who are responsible for handling that, were they trained on how to use that? Because, like, for example, even at this also kind of goes to the university level, and kind of even assessing this at like my own college. And I know that there have been a lot of like communication gaps with like emergency responders, as well as safety personnel at the school on where evacuation chairs are located, and how to use different emergency equipment, how to communicate that with the disabled people that they're assisting. So support in all of those things. And also, of course, using like models, legislative models, like, my bill in Virginia, as well as states like Maryland, New Jersey, and California, which have similar laws as well. And kind of providing those frameworks and the results from those states to other states, and really facilitating communication, departments of education, so that they can communicate with IEP and 504 teams and give them guidance on how.
So, can I add something? One of the areas I think that we need to look at if we're developing a tool that often gets overlooked, and I think it's one of the most important, is every great plan, and if you talk to military, every battle plan goes out the door the minute the first shot's fired. So any toolkit has to include stress testing the plan, adapting the plan, and then repeating the process. So with that nothing happens. So when we're developing a toolkit, we have to stress that. I think is the primary area that has to be done. As you say, if it had been stress tests for the example you gave, Kira, with the child in the schoolroom, that person, the aide, would have immediately gone there immediately. But obviously it wasn't tested. It was a plan that nobody ever saw or read. And that's where I think we get hung up in the government section of things.
This is Lydia, and I'd like to just add to that, and that could be something great that we could add in the toolkit, how to develop mock evacuations, or whatever the case may be in terms of if something's happening in a school, or if something's happening, natural disaster, how to develop and start those mock situations.
FEMA used to have mock evacuate or do like mock disaster recovery. I don't think they've had that in a number of years.
I can tell you in California, we do the annual shakeout and it's become a joke. Literally, because getting employees on board, okay, get a group in, and so.
It's
Well,
ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Right, right. And when it started, it was very, very good. But now
Yeah.
it's become a process we have to do. And that
Yeah.
has to be a buy-in and a culture that we have to create. So
Totally.
Oh, I was just going to comment that Dr. Fonseca, I appreciated the information about looking at the evacuation procedures and then trying to design them for everybody. Because I know I have often thought, what would happen to me, being in a wheelchair now? What would I do when everybody else runs out? Because I can't run, I can't hide. Right. I mean, they'll see me, right? They're gonna see me. Bill's gonna save me. We're together. I believe you. But yeah, I've been in these situations before when I've worked in other places and different employers. We always struggle with, what if you're upstairs? What do we do? What do people in wheelchairs do? What do people with other disabilities do? And it's always concerned me. So it's nice to know that, somebody's thinking about, well, what do you do if you can't run, you can't hide, and do those things? What are some of the options for people? And then to go through it, to do those exercises and see, what do people learn? Because you always learn something.
Yes, you do.
Right? When you do those
Mhm.
exercises the first time at least.
Yes.
Yeah. You'll learn something, someone's gonna get left behind and people will see, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
This is something we have to address, or how can we solve this problem? How can we be creative? Right? What I would like for them to do for me is to build a big cardboard box about my size, and then I could just roll into that.
There you go.
And no one's gonna look in that, so. Okay, two, one for, different size boxes,
size
but
boxes.
I wanted to throw that out as an option.
No, this is Lydia. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do want to add that in that inclusive critical incidents response training that we were working on, we did get an opportunity to get people with disabilities as actors so that we can kind of do the process, and we took pictures and video, because all of the active shooter training or critical incident response training that is out there, curriculum, marketing material, has all able-bodied persons or people without any kind of disability. And so we wanted to start getting material out there that actually showed folks with disabilities and what they can do during those instances. So that we're working on that as well.
I don't want to start another question because my colleagues are looking at me like, Neil, it's 5 after 12. But I think that what's terribly important in something like this is that we remember the communications aspect of a toolkit, whatever that might be. Obviously, there's multiple tracks that need to be covered in that. It's a lot of this requires communication. The other thing is always from my point of view, I've seen some very successful things when you also try to weave in as best you can the private sector and make them advocates as opposed to just being inactive in something like this. So how do we add those to the toolkit? How do we develop, a communications and advocacy plan that works, that works effectively with the communication? I am from Florida, and I have seen it with some, remarkable hospitals and stuff in our group that have done some great stuff. So it's something to keep in mind as we do this. The communication is, I'm a communicator, so it's right at the top of my list, but it's something that has to always be focused on very, very carefully. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you guys for a wonderful panel.
Any other comments?
I have one comment. I know something I always worry about is when I'm alone, like if I'm alone in my house, and like if there's in San Francisco where I live, what we always worry about is an earthquake that's fixing for us. Whenever I'm alone, I always have to little worry about what if there's an earthquake and what if I can communicate with my support people and what would I do, so I think something around that might be good.
This is Lisa. Thank you all for a wonderful panel. Appreciate your perspective. For the council, I just would love for that toolkit, and I love the idea of statutory language, to be part of it. Policy recommendation, clearly some clear example if it's an option, it's not going to happen. So how do we really make it permanent?
Yeah.
That's my thought.
Great. So, we good?
I think we're good.
All right. I think we're beating that horse. which is not always a bad thing, but I really before we close, I just wanted to thank once again. I mean, I've done it a couple times as staff, but there's one staff member that I think has gone an extra mile for this whole council meeting being here, and he doesn't get much credit. And so Nick, on behalf of the council, thank you for making this possible. The Zoom, if you saw the YouTube Zoom, the shots were amazing. I think everything went pretty well. We had microphone issues, but we won't blame that on Nick. It just happens. I mean, as we say, if something doesn't happen, doesn't go right, then did you really have a meeting? So, but other than that, with that, if there's nothing else, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Sasha says she moves because she's ready to go back to bed in California. Do I have a second? Second. And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sasha.
I'm sorry for all the technical